All right, hello class, welcome back. So we have finished Unit 1, congratulations. So now we're going to start out our first chapter from Unit 2, is Chapter 5 on socialization. So we'll start out with a handy-dandy definition here. So socialization describes a long process through which we, as people, as members of a society, are pretty much taught. We're taught lessons, implicit and explicit, over time, where we're kind of, we're normalized in a society. We're taught to be capable and proficient members of a society. What does that mean? We come to understand what are the norms in our society. What do people generally expect of us? We start learning about society's beliefs and values and all those other things we talked about in the chapter 3 on culture. Now, even the most basic things that we probably often take for granted, that we don't even think about, consciously, a lot of the activities we take part in are learned activities. We learned them at some point in time. How to sit, how to stand, how to walk, how to use language, how to sit in a chair, how to, bounce a basketball or kick a soccer ball, how and when to hold and use a fork. Unlike Ariel, who didn't really understand that material culture of the fork and how to use it, so she decided to brush her hair with it. And then knowing like when, where it's socially acceptable to go to the bathroom, and other kind of social expectations of modesty and understanding that, and norms of polite behavior. Again, a lot of the stuff we talked about in chapter 3 in culture, those are learned values, learned beliefs, learned behaviors. So why does it matter? Well, again, going back to chapter 3, without a culture, there can't really be a society. If we don't teach culture continuously to the new members of a society, the babies, the young ones, we have to transmit these values, these beliefs, these norms to the new generations so that our culture, our society, can continue to exist, can perpetuate itself into the future. So, especially in American culture, right? From a young age, we start learning about values about democracy and voting and equality, patriotism, being proud of our country and of our flag. Socialization also, defines how we view ourselves over time. So we'll look at a few theories about this in this lesson, how a lot of sociologists, view kind of ourself, our own identity, how we view ourself is kind of a construction or something that we learn via society. So we'll get more into some different perspectives on, our self and our selfhood and our personal identity also, and how society kind of transmits ideas about identity and selfhood to us. Now, the easiest way to kind of recognize the importance of socialization, especially since so many of these activities, these beliefs, we kind of, at a certain point in life, just take for granted. It's just normal, right? But, if we were raised otherwise, if we were raised somewhere else by other people, maybe the things that we take for granted as normal wouldn't seem so normal. So the best way, to kind of think about the impact that socialization has on us is to look at cases of what we call feral children. And I have a few pictures or screenshots from some videos I have posted in chapter 5 that go over a few stories of feral children. Now, feral children are children who basically, another way to think of feral is like wild. So children who haven't really been socialized, especially in their early years, early childhood, they haven't had a lot of contact with other human beings, their parents, any guardians. And so they kind of lack all of those important lessons that we get at super early ages in our lives. Of course, we can't really do experiments like this. That would be pretty unethical. So when it comes to these cases of feral children, we're usually reliant on pretty tragic stories, stories of children who have been found, maybe later in their childhood, and who have been kind of abandoned or neglected or abused by their guardians or their parents. But, their tragic experiences also show us just how much we, depend on social interaction to be considered, part of a society, to be considered normal, and even to understand, a sense of selfhood or self-identity. Because a lot of these feral children and their stories, they don't even seem to understand like a concept of self, or who they are. So without, kind of all these regular interactions that, many of us, luckily, had growing up, being held, being hugged, being talked to, being taught lessons, from the time we were little teeny babies. Demonstrations that our parents or our older siblings or cousins or peers gave to us. Feral children don't really have those opportunities. Many of them didn't learn how to walk or speak or eat the way that we would, with proper manners, right, and silverware, or how to interact with other people, how to play, how to understand, who they are and the world around them. Basically, they weren't socialized. So I encourage you, there's a couple videos in chapter 5, some shorter clips that go over some of these stories of different feral children. I'm going to go over really briefly one of them, but I encourage you to watch through those videos just to give you a better idea of kind of all the different stories that are presented there. So the one story I'm going to highlight is the case of Oksana Malaya. So she was a little girl. She was born in Russia. Her parents were, drug addicts, alcoholics, and often, neglected her at a very, very young age. She was still an infant, really, crawling around. And, one night, as she tells the story now, her parents kind of forgot she was around and she wandered outside in the cold, and there were all these kind of dogs, wild dogs that lived around the house, and they started to care for her. They dragged her into their kennel to be warm and cuddled with her, and over many years, that kind of became her life. These dogs kind of socialized her into their pack rather than her being socialized by, her human parents. So due to her parents' negligence, she was essentially raised by this pack of dogs. And when she was eventually found by, social services in Russia and rescued from that situation, it took many, I mean, they're still working on rehabilitating her and trying to, re-socialize her, into a human world rather than a dog world. But when she was found, she very much seemed like a dog. She barked, she crawled around on all fours, she did not want to walk on, two legs. When she was given food, she wanted to eat it out of a bowl with no silverware, straight her face into the bowl. Water, she, also drank as a dog would drink it, not out of a glass. She usually barked right to communicate, didn't really have any language skills. She wanted to hunt for her food. When she was shown a mirror so she could see herself in the mirror, like she did not recognize herself. She didn't understand, what the impact of that was supposed to be to her. So many differences that maybe we don't even really think about all the ways that our parents or our guardians or the people who raised us from such an early age, how much they really contributed to our socialization into our society, into human life, into understandings of who we are as individuals and as selves. All right, so kind of on this topic now of the self, we're going to look at a few different sociologists and their approaches to kind of their theories of self-development. So often in our society, especially in social media, there's such an emphasis on who are you, what sets you apart, what makes you you, what is your identity, how are you special, right? But there's other questions, right? How are you different from other people, at Columbus Tech? How are you different from people in your neighborhood or even in your family or in other regions or cities or states in the United States or in other countries? And then, with those same questions, in what ways are you the same as people at CTC, in your neighborhood, in your family, in your city, in your state? So these following slides are going to kind of, focus on how we construct our sense of self, how our own identities are also in many ways a product of our socialization. That we can only be a self, or, we can only recognize our own identity because we recognize other norms in society and other beliefs and the way that society views us or judges us. So we'll start with Charles Cooley back in 1902. And he came up with this concept of the looking glass self. We'll start down here on the bottom right with his famous quote, which is, "I am not what I think I am, and I am not what you think I am. I am what I think you think I am." So for him, he said our self-understanding it's in many ways a social construct. And it's created over time by way of, how we perceive how others are judging us or how we perceive how others perceive us. So, our sense of self, our identity, is in many ways constructed by our social interactions and how we, assess how are other people looking at me? How are people judging me? And then we come to internalize those thoughts. And that's how we start to define ourselves, by way of those perceived judgments of others. So he said, Charles Cooley, in his looking glass self theory, said there were kind of 3 stages in our process of developing, our sense of self. So stage 1, we imagine how we appear to other people. I'm going to use, let's say an Instagram picture, okay, as an example here. So stage 1, we imagine how we appear to others. All right, so we take a selfie in our house by ourselves, and we think we look really good. Cool. I'm going to post it on Instagram. We imagine how we're going to appear to others. So as we're posting it, we're thinking, oh, I look so good in this picture. It shows my, my cool room or my cool house and my art and, my pets and all the things that I love. And everyone is gonna, think this picture is awesome and that I am so interesting, right? Then we get to stage 2. Based on our social interactions and observations, we imagine how others are evaluating or judging us. So at this stage, we've posted the picture. We already imagined how it would, appear to other people. And obviously, since we posted it, we had optimistic ideas about that. But then stage 2, based on now people interacting with our picture on Instagram. Let's say let's take 3 different examples. Number 1, we're getting a lot of likes. People are commenting saying, "Oh, you're so great," or, "Your house is beautiful. I love, your art. Your dogs are so adorable," etc., etc. All right, so now based on these social interactions, we're probably feeling pretty good about ourselves. We're imagining how others are judging us, and it seems to be pretty positively. But let's take it another way. All right, you post your picture, and then people are not being so nice. People are saying, "Oh my God, like your nose is so big," or "Get a haircut," or "Shave your beard," "Get a nose job." What else? "Put on some makeup." "Your dogs need training." "What is that art? Your room is so gross and messy," etc. Right? And a lot of, down votes. Okay, so now based on our social interactions, how people are interacting with our photo, now we might not be feeling so good about ourselves. Might be imagining all the ways that people are now judging us in a negative way. Or take it another way. We post our picture, and nobody's even responding or reacting to it. We're not getting any upvotes or down votes. No one's, commenting. It's been posted for hours. Nothing's happening. There's no, interaction. Does anyone care? Does anyone pay attention to my picture? So now we're starting to imagine, why isn't anyone saying anything? Do I matter? Asking all of these questions. Is this picture not as good as I thought it was? Am I boring? Why isn't anyone saying anything? So kind of 3 different ways to think about that. And now we'll move to stage 3. Our sense of self is affected by how we think about what others think about us. So let's go with, the first example. We get a bunch of upvotes, people saying we're great, we're beautiful, our house is awesome, our pets are so cute, our art is great and like creative and so unique. And in stage 2, we're imagining, okay, everyone seems to be reacting positively to me and my picture. So stage 3, we start to internalize those judgments. We start to think, based on how many likes we had, on the good, positive comments. We start to think, okay, maybe I am great. Maybe I am, beautiful or handsome or attractive. Maybe I do have great taste in art, and I'm a great pet owner and take care of my animals and they're well trained, etc. Let's take the second example, the negative one. We saw a bunch of downvotes and people being mean about our appearance and our taste and our art and our pets. So then stage 3, we start to internalize those feelings. We start to think, I'm ugly. I'm, not as good as this other person who's getting a bunch of positive responses. Nobody likes my decor. I have bad taste. So we start to internalize those senses of ourselves. So that's, Charles Cooley, Looking Glass Self. We're not who we think we are. We're not who other people think we are, but we're basically reflections of how we perceive other people to be judging us. And we kind of internalize those judgments over time. And those internalized judgments over time, create this sense of self that we develop throughout our lives. All right, so we got through Charles Cooley, the looking glass self. Now we're moving on to George Herbert Mead. So Mead wrote this book over here, Mind, Self, and Society. Again, he was working back in the early 1900s alongside Charles Cooley. And he was also interested in how we construct our sense of self. So how he defined a self is basically a person's unique identity that is developed through social interaction. So yes, we're unique, but that uniqueness is also a product of our socialization, of judgments of other people, and how we come to understand those judgments. So he claimed individuals learn to be able to view themselves through the eyes of others, what he called the generalized other. So for him, basically, our concept of having our own identity, of having a self, being self-aware is not something that we're born with. And those stories of feral children, kind of illustrate that. A lot of those kids don't have this sense of personal identity. So it's something that is part of our society, this idea of having a self, of having a personal identity. So in many ways, having a self is a learned behavior. We begin to view ourselves through the eyes of other people. So for Mead, he said this was a 3-stage process. So a 3-stage, path of development to self-discovery, or to defining, how we construct our identity. So stage 1 is the preparatory stage. And if any of you have, raised young children, you'll be probably pretty familiar with kind of these stages. So stage 1 is the preparatory stage. Basically, this is, younger children, maybe like 0, infants to like 2, 3 years old. In this stage of our development, we usually are kind of just imitating what we see around us. Generally, what our older siblings or our neighbors or our parents do. And it's very, it's very much an imitation stage. We just kind of copy what we see other people doing. We copy the actions of the people who we live with. So like in this picture over here, right, this kid's kind of like looking at his dad. Is this how I brush my teeth? Okay, we're brushing our teeth all together. Dad's doing it, older brother's doing it, I'll do it too. But at this point, it's all just very imitative. You're just kind of copying what you're seeing. Copy and paste. But you're not really imagining like how other people see things yet. Stage 2, we move into maybe around age 3. And this is when you start seeing kids playing dress up. So this is what he called the play stage. So children start to take on the role of other people. They start to recognize that there's different roles in society that people play. And there's different characteristics that go along with those roles. So kind of like we were talking about last week with Irving Goffman and dramaturgy and Zimbardo's experiment on roles. So children at this point, it kind of goes beyond just imitation. You understand that there's roles in society, and you kind of start to understand the social scripts that fit with those roles and to act them out. So we might start to take, the parent's point of view at this point in our lives, or we start acting out grown-up behavior, playing make-believe, coming up with imaginary scenarios that we can play a part in, playing dress up, of roles that we see adults around us playing. In stage 3, is where Mead says we start to develop this sense of the generalized other. So this is what he calls the game stage. So children here, start to not only recognize different roles in society, but they start to understand how different roles are interacting with each other, and how they can play off each other, and how multiple roles can be taking place at the same time, and how those different roles interact. So we start to recognize, in larger groups, in games, the roles that different players or people can take part in. And we start to be able to anticipate the way other people might respond to us and the things that we do and the roles that we take on. So this right here is when we develop, his concept of the generalized other, which is kind of more of an abstract way of understanding kind of the general expectations of our society. We kind of just understand in any situation how people are going to want us to react or respond or act. So this is when we start to understand, a complex set of role relationships. Children can start imagining how they're viewed by other people, and how if they, do a certain action, how it's going to affect other people, or how other people will judge them. But not just their, not just, oh, if I steal this candy bar from the store, my mom's going to be mad at me. It goes a little bit beyond that. It goes to, the generalized other. If I steal this candy bar from the store, that's wrong. Most people in society will look down on me and judge me. And I know, based on all my lessons so far in life, that that's, the wrong thing to do. It's the bad thing to do. So kind of this, that like any random person in society, how they would judge me for doing a certain thing. The generalized other. And it's also at this, stage that we start to, have that sense of self, to understand, our part in society, and also, our responsibilities to this concept of the generalized other in society and how we fit in. So it's at this stage, where a kid would start to understand, say, a baseball game, and understand all of the different roles of the positions in the baseball game, and how each role, plays a part in the larger process of the team winning or losing, and how each position interacts with the other ones, and how each team interacts with the other team, and how the crowd interacts with the players, and vice versa. And how the crowd interacts with each other. So starting to understand all these different roles of people in society, and in particular here, in a baseball game. All right, so this next guy is named Lawrence Kohlberg. So Lawrence Kohlberg here was more interested in our stages of moral development. So how do we come to understand, or how are we socialized into society's understandings of morality, of what is right and what is wrong, what's good, what's bad. And it's important, right, for any society to kind of have a general understanding, a general agreement on what is right and wrong, or else you might have chaos, right? Every society has a sense of like law and order that is enforced, either, again, explicitly through formal norms, or implicitly through more informal norms and folkways. So Lawrence Kohlberg was interested in how we develop morally. And he also came up with a 3-stage process that we pass through as we develop our sense of morality. So level 1, stage 1, is the preconventional stage. And again, if you've been around young kids or raised young kids, I'm sure you'll recognize these stages. If you are doing early childhood education. So stage 1, pre-conventional morality. This is very young children, and they're generally mostly pretty interested in what's in it for them. If they obey the rules, what are they going to get out of it? If they don't obey the rules, what's going to happen to them? So it's all about like avoiding punishment and trying to maybe get a reward for obedience to the rules. But it's all really comes down to self-interest. What's in it for me? Am I going to get a sticker if I do this? Is mom going to give me a hug or a back rub? Or am I going to have to go to timeout if I don't do this, or if I disobey? Or am I going to go be sent to my room, or won't be able to watch my favorite cartoon tonight? So pre-conventional stage, all about me. The next stage here, level 2, is conventional. And this hits us, in adolescence. So in adolescence, we kind of move a little bit beyond just the self-interest, and we start to take other people's feelings into account. But specific people, my mom, my teacher, my dad, my older sibling, my grandma, my pastor. So we start to be aware of other people's feelings in our social world, and we start to take them into consideration when we take any kind of action. So this is when we start to learn the importance of meeting the expectations of the people in our lives, and in some ways to fulfill our duty as a good child, or a good student, or a good if you go to church, like a good Christian, or whatever faith that you follow. And we start to understand that there's a need for respect for authority. So here, if you're obeying the rules, you might be doing so because you don't want mom to get mad at you, or because mom said so, or dad said so. Mom said I can't have dessert until I clean my room, so I'm going to do it because that's my duty as a good son or daughter. Or my teacher told me not to spitballs at somebody else in my class. So I'm going to not do it because I respect the teacher's authority and I want to be a good student. So we start to take other people's feelings into account when we make actions, but they're people that we know kind of personally. We're doing them like for someone that we know kind of intimately in our life. Then kind of when we move into our teenage years is when Kohlberg said we start to develop our post-conventional morality. And so here we start to think of morality in terms of like abstractions, like, in our Constitution, right, there's a belief set forth that everyone has a right to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. Not just your mom or your teacher or people that you personally know, but everyone in your society, right, has a have these rights. So they're more abstract. They're not just about the particular. So we start to have moral beliefs not just about particular relationships that we are in with intimate people like our mom or our teacher or our brother or sister, but we start to think of morality kind of more in a wide perspective. Rules about right and wrong that apply to everyone. and responsibilities that we have to people that we may not even know, but that are part of our social world. So we start to see the world and what's right, what's wrong through other people's eyes, not just through dad's eyes, right, or grandpa's eyes, but through kind of like anyone's eyes in our society and how they would view our actions. Now, Carol Gilligan actually, she used to kind of study alongside Lawrence Kohlberg. They wrote some papers together. But this particular three-stage path of moral development that he came up with, Carol Gilligan had some issues with. So she criticized his work for being gender biased. She said, and this was back in the 70s, and she said that he only was studying male subjects when he came up with this, path of moral development. And back in the 70s, certainly, she argued that men and women, boys and girls, were socialized differently, and that she kind of hypothesized that boys and girls would have different kind of moral developments based on their gendered socialization. So she replicated his study, but included boys and girls in the study. And what she found, well, first, actually, let me tell you what the study is. So she would present these children or teenagers with this moral dilemma that's called the Heinz Dilemma. It's kind of a classic moral test or moral story. And you have to kind of make the decision whether Mr. Heinz did the right thing or the wrong thing. So here it is in a nutshell. Mr. Heinz has a very sick son, and the son is on the verge of, passing away. There is a cure for what his son has, but it's very, very expensive. It's a pill. They have it in the local pharmacy, but, Mr. and Mrs. Heinz, they cannot afford this pill. And they've tried, multiple ways to try to get it, and the pharmacy just won't let them have it unless he has the money to pay for it. So one night, his son is, crying in so much pain. It's not looking good. And Mr. Heinz decides, well, the pharmacy's closed. I know they have this pill in the pharmacy. I'm going to go break in to the pharmacy and I'm going to steal this pill and give it to my son, and he will, be saved. So that's what he does. So that's the moral dilemma. That's the scenario that's presented to all these kids or teenagers. And then they're asked, okay, what do you think about this, scenario? Do you think what Mr. Heinz did was right or wrong? Was it good or bad? So Carol Gilligan, here she's asking, both boys and girls what they think of this. And she found that, again, this is the 70s, but she found, that boys tended to argue that what Mr. Heinz did was wrong, that it's against the law, it was not the right course of action to take, that he should have, gone a different route or figured something else out where he didn't have to break into the pharmacy and steal the drug for his son. So Gilligan suggested that boys have a more justice-oriented perspective when it comes to, following laws, following rules, and avoiding punishment. And her argument was that boys, again, historical context, this was in the 70s, she said boys were being socialized for the work environment where you have to follow standard rules, where laws are important, where if you break the rules or the laws, you get fired or go to jail. So she argued, boys were being socialized in a certain way, and so they viewed kind of the Heinz dilemma in a specific way as well. Now, when she presented that same dilemma to the girls she was studying, they came up with very different answers. they would answer, well, or they would be a little bit more nuanced, like, what he did was against the law, but, we also have to take into account why he was doing it for his son. He's doing it out of love, out of compassion. He had good reason to, break the law or break the rules. And so she said, girls have a more kind of nuanced morality, more oriented around, caring, understanding, personal, with more of an emphasis on like our personal connections and responsibilities to explain why we do the things we do, and have a more kind of understanding view of maybe what's right or what's wrong. So the girls gave a lot more consideration to like why people would misbehave or would do something that seemed morally wrong or against the law. So a lot more, questions as to, why did they do that? Try and think of the reasons why people might have done something rather than just saying it was wrong, they should be punished. And so her argument was, again, 1970s, she said girls were being socialized for the home environment where, you had to care for children and care for your husband, and the family, and kind of live a more domesticated life, which put a lot more emphasis on, personal connection, personal responsibilities. So in the end, Gilligan kind of came up with a different path of moral development than Colbert did, and said, at the time period that she's writing in the 70s, that, men and women's different moral perspectives, kind of these different emphases we put on judging, what's right and what's wrong, were products of, socialization of different genders over time. And for her, she noted, as many feminists do, that neither perspective, the masculine or the feminine one, was better or worse than the other, and that a good, healthy balance between these two perspectives would actually be, kind of the best way to recognize our potential as social human beings. All right. So that's it for our theories for this week. And now we're going to kind of just wrap up thinking about some different agents of socialization in our lives. And we'll come back to many of these agents throughout the rest of the class. So, number one, we're going to start with our social group agents, which are the family and our peer groups. So the family is obviously kind of our first agent of socialization. We're born and then we go home, and who's there with us? Our family or our guardians, our extended family, our grandparents, our siblings. And so these are the people who really orient us to our lives. They show us how to relate to other people. They teach us innumerable lessons about how the world works. From our very young ages, we are taught, distinctions between, who's your family, who are friends, and who are strangers, stranger danger, and kind of a mistrust of, others or people you don't know. They also teach us the difference between, the real, what's imaginary. And they also teach us about many, many other lessons in our lives. Probably not explicitly, but implicitly. We start to learn about, things like gender norms. How do mom and dad interact with each other? How, if you have a big brother and a big sister, how are they, raised, or how are they treated? Are they treated differently? Are they disciplined in the same way? Do they have the same expectations set upon them? Perceptions of race. We start to learn from a young age as well. Class-related behaviors. And then, when we start going to preschool or kindergarten, we suddenly have this new social group agent introduced into our lives, which are our peer groups. So these are people who are similar in age and social status, and they often share interests with us. So peer groups are the first major socialization experience outside the realm of our families, and they start to teach us, other norms that we may not have learned at home. Things like taking turns, learning how to share, learning how to play on the playground, and follow the rules. And as we grow into teenagers, as many of us know, we start to exert kind of more of a sense of independence from our family. This is where, many of those theorists just now say, we start to really develop our sense of self and our sense of morality kind of at this teenage stage. So we start to really understand and develop our identities even apart from our family and our parents here. And then we also have, several institutional agents of socialization. The first of which that we become really familiar with is, our school. Children spend a lot of time in school. Ever since, middle of the 1800s, school has, become compulsory. You have to attend some sort of schooling in our society, whether it's public school or private school or charter school or homeschool. The U.S. government, expects you to be in some sort of formal schooling. And most children in America spend, about 7 hours a day, 180 days a year in school. So it's pretty critical kind of space for our socialization, kind of beyond just our peer groups or our families. Now, the primary function of school, obviously, is to teach you your subjects, your math, your addition and subtraction, your reading, your science, your civics, your history lessons. However, in sociology, we're more interested in kind of what's referred to as the hidden curriculum of school. So these are things that kind of go beyond, those formal lessons of math and science. So kind of the secondary function of school is to continue to socialize us into certain behaviors and norms that society is going to expect from us once we are fully functioning adults. These lessons, sometimes they're explicitly stated or written down, but not always. Sometimes they're more passively communicated to us. So I have some examples. Number one, and this has been in the news recently, textbook material. Different states, different school districts, have different textbooks for a variety of reasons. Some textbooks, exclude certain lessons. Some include lessons. And the way those lessons are included or excluded can kind of systematically alter the way that students perceive history. For example, there's a lot of textbooks that kind of gloss over, the way that Native Americans were treated at the beginning of, the colonial era of this land. There's a lot of textbooks that, gloss over, slavery in America. And there's different arguments on both sides, right, for addressing these, lessons kind of more openly and honestly. And there's those who would argue, that that teaching these lessons, too early on, is not a good idea. So there's debates about this, certainly, if you look it up, going on right now. Number two, group projects and games at recess. These kind of things train us in teamwork, in collaboration, in leadership, all skills that are going to be, indispensable by the time we become adults and need to get jobs. Those qualities are highly valued in any workplace. On the same note, things like following a daily schedule. You go to school, you have your daily schedule, you do the same thing every day, every week. The school bell rings, you better get to your next class before the beginning of the next period, and the bell rings again. You get punished if you're tardy. So all these different aspects, the schedule, the school bell, tardiness, punishments. These are ways to kind of train us as students, as young children, to be personally responsible and the importance of being on time, which again is going to be important when we get to working age. You can't be late for work. Might get fired, might get written up. Next, raising your hand to speak in class, learning not to fidget, sit still. So understanding, training kids in the rules of order and hierarchy and respect for your authority figures. A few more letter grades. This one's more obvious. Sports recognition ceremonies, student awards, all of those, kind of rankings, ways of ranking students or children kind of develop a competitive drive in us, or a worldview where, some people are winners and some people are losers. Standardized tests, set up kind of a uniformity of expectations for all of us. Of course, the American flag is present in every public school classroom in this country, and we're also expected to start our day with the recitation of the Pledge of Allegiance. So our schools, public schools, at least, also continually socialize us into, the importance of our citizenship in, our nation, in our society, and national pride. And then there's some these two things, maybe the emphasis of a particular school. Every school kind of has its thing. Is it a school that's known for, academic excellence? Is it a school that excels at, the arts or sports or music? Which programs at the school, get the most funding? And whether or not, depending on what school you go to, if you are going to a school that, puts a lot of emphasis on sports and a lot of funding into sports, but you're not a very sporty person, you're more artistic, you like to play an instrument, then you might feel kind of excluded over time. Or if you are at a school that, puts a lot of emphasis on sports and you're an amazing, quarterback for the football team, then you're going to feel very included. So these kind of feelings of, belonging or alienation can develop based on whether or not, we might excel in the school's favored programs. And then lastly, things like a physical condition of a school. Are the classrooms in disrepair? Or are they really nice and modern looking? Are the desks new, or do they have, scribblings and gum on them from 50 years ago? Are the textbooks new, or were they published in 1983? Or, are they pretty, in nice, good shape? Are they damaged? Are they missing pages? What does the school look like? What are the resources that students have? And those kind of things, can kind of communicate things to students over time as well. Like, are you worth investing in? Is this school, is this neighborhood worth investing in the education of the children who live here? So students might over time, especially if you're in an underfunded school with, buildings that haven't been properly maintained, that there's lead in the water fountain, and things are kind of crumbling apart. You might internalize feelings of, a lack of value or resentment. If your surroundings aren't cared for, you might start to think, Well, does my society, does my local neighborhood, does my school district, do they value me or value us at this school? So school, another institutional agent of socialization, we're going to look at is work. So school in many ways socializes us for our work lives. And then once we get into the working world, we are further socialized in our workplaces. So workplace socialization refers to the process by which employees come to understand all sorts of things about where they're working now, the company's policies, the internal culture, how the company hierarchy works, ways to function effectively and normally in the organization. And when we get to school, other skills become, or when we get to work, other school skills like interpersonal skills, or sometimes they're called soft skills, start to be incredibly important. Things like, cooperation, communication, being able to listen, and communicate, exhibiting appropriate, nonverbal communication with your body language, eye contact, facial expressions. All of these are, things that people pay attention to when you go in for an interview. They're not just looking at your resume, they're also paying attention to all of these other kind of softer skills, these interpersonal skills that you exhibit and what you'll bring to the workplace. And how you can act, as a team member. So also at work, wherever we work, we have to kind of learn, socialize ourselves to the material and the non-material culture of our workplace. You have to learn, where is my workspace? Where's my office, my cubicle, my department? What area am I expected to be in? You have to learn, where do I go to the bathroom? Is there an employee bathroom? Or do I go to the public bathroom? Who cleans the bathroom? The HR office, where's that? Where's my boss's office? Where's the break room? To learn all those things, where to throw out the trash, where's the dumpster? And also, we have to learn all the non-material culture. If there's a coffee machine, how do we share it? Is that responsibility shared? Who cleans it? Who makes the coffee? Who buys the coffee? Who orders the coffee? How and when to speak with the boss? Can you work at a place where you can just walk up to your boss anytime? Do you need to go through a supervisor first? You need to schedule an appointment? Should you maybe avoid talking to the boss altogether? We learn all those things, at work as well. How and when to speak to coworkers, learning the chain of command, who to go to for what, knowing what is and is not appropriate to talk about at work, which can differ depending on where you're working and the culture there. So work socializes us. Our government also socializes us in different ways. Our government, really socializes us into like age norms, rites of passage into new social categories based on how old we are. So, at what age are you considered an adult by the government or legally responsible? What age can you drink? Can you vote? Can you smoke? Can you drive? Can you register for military service? How old do you have to be to get married? At what age are you expected to pay taxes or pay for your health care? When are you old? When are you considered of old age? And when do you get your senior benefits? So all of these questions, our government answers for us. Political socialization is also kind of a process that our government bestows upon us, which is this process whereby, we start to develop attitudes, values, beliefs, kind of understanding our political culture in our country, and behaviors that are conducive, behaviors that mean we are a good citizen to our country. So we, at very young ages, our government starts to socialize us to understanding, respect for authorities, respect for, the president, for our teachers, for firefighters, for public officials, and the importance of, doing the right thing and obeying the law. All right, couple more here. So another institutional agent of socialization is the mass media, which we'll come back to in many other lessons. The media, at least the mass media, refers to the distribution of impersonal information directed at a wide audience, whether it's through the internet, through TV, magazines, comic books, radio, video games, movies, music, etc., newspapers. So the media greatly influences, especially like our social norms, our roles that we start to understand, the different social scripts that are associated with certain roles. And it also, kind of undergirds a lot of these societal values, norms, beliefs that the other agents of socialization are, helping to teach us as well. So the mass media defines, again, the roles that we admire, the celebrities we might want to emulate, and obviously the importance of advertising in, our socialization as well, and encouraging us to, buy certain products or buy into certain lifestyles. So for, the average, 8 to 12-year-old, they spend about 4.5 hours a day looking at a screen. And that time span is only, getting longer over time with, now the internet and cell phones and tablets at our disposal. So the media also socializes us, not just by what it shows us, but also by what it doesn't show us. And there's been a lot of progress on this in the past 10 years especially, but still not entirely equitable. But what races, what ethnicities are represented on, the top television shows and movies that we watch. And if, other races or ethnicities are represented, are they represented in, a substantive way or in kind of a more shallow way? Also, how are men and women represented? What ideals of beauty or femininity are promoted? What ideals, of masculinity are promoted, through our media? Are, gay, LGBTQ individuals represented, and how? And how prevalent is violence or sex in the media we consume? So just like any other agent of socialization, what we watch, what we're around, the lessons we learn, whether it's from our family or our friends or school or the media, what we're putting in our brains and watching and taking in has some effect on us and our, social expectations. All right, and the last institutional agent of socialization is religion. So formal religion, obviously, it really orients us toward everything in our lives. Emil Durkheim, who we've talked about a bit, for him, he thought religion was like the most important institution in our social life, that it defines how we view everything else in our social world, how we believe. Religion comes down to, what we think, why we are on this earth, who put us here, right? What is our purpose here? And kind of, if we believe in God, God is the ultimate arbiter of what is right and what is wrong. So religion is a very important institution in our socialization. So some religions, promote individualism, like Protestantism or being a Methodist, right, or a Presbyterian. Other religions promote more communitarian ethos, like Judaism or Catholicism. Some religions don't really have that much hierarchy, like the Quaker Church has very little hierarchy, if any. Other religions have very, very complex hierarchies, like the Catholic Church, leading all the way up to the Pope. So religion also teaches us how to interact with material culture of our religion, whether it's a prayer altar or a mezuzah, that Jews put on their doors, a prayer confessional like you'd find in a Catholic church, a prayer rug that you'll find Islam or Muslims using, or a communion wafer. And believers, also have to learn other aspects of the material culture of their religion, like songs and prayers and chants and dances. Our religions also, regulate major life and death events in our society that relate to family structure. Things like our marriages, baptisms, funerals are all kind of administered by our religious authorities. And a lot of religions also socialize people to uphold gender norms. So, especially Judeo-Christian religions, kind of set apart men and women, usually viewing women as kind of the lesser sex, the sex that should, or the gender that should obey, while men should be obeyed, or and oftentimes that goes back to, the story of Adam and Eve and the fact that, Eve committed the original sin. She was tempted, right? And she's the one who kind of, put us all in this situation where we're now all sinners. So a lot of religions, kind of maintain those gender norms, viewing, men as kind of the leader of the household. And that carries on into religious leadership as well. A lot of, religious sects do not allow women to preach or to have any place in, church leadership. All right, and then our last little term for this week is resocialization. So far, I've been talking about socialization, right? But there's certain times in our life where we might be, subject to a process of resocialization, which is when, we're put into a situation where old behaviors that used to make us normal, that used to be helpful in our previous society, are no longer applicable to our current role in a new society. And these can be very stressful because, people have to unlearn behaviors that become customary to them. You have to, undo everything that you've learned, all those things that we've been socialized into by our families, by religions, by our peer groups, by school. You have to unlearn all of those things that you learned so that you can now fit into this new society. So we most often see resocialization happen in a total institution. So a total institution is a place where people are almost entirely isolated from the original society that they were a part of. And oftentimes in a total institution, we are coerced, almost forced to follow an entirely new set of rules that we're not used to. So if you go to prison, right, that's a total institution. You're completely isolated from, the normal world, right, where there were expectations, norms, values, beliefs that you were used to, and now they don't apply anymore. You have to now learn the rules of the prison and your new role in it. Same thing with a convent or a monastery. If you decide to go become a nun or a monk, you're going to go to a total institution very often, convents and monasteries are very isolated from the rest of society. Or if you join a cult, like the People's Temple that I talked about, what was that, chapter 3, I think. Cults often, by their very nature, want to isolate their members from the rest of society, from their families, from everything that they knew, and subject them to an entirely new set of rules to live by. Another example on the next slide that I'm going to show y'all is the military. The military, in many ways, is a total institution, especially when you're first starting out. There's a lot of norms, rules, rituals, drills, ways to act, ways to respond to people, ways to speak, that in the military become normal, but in normal civilian life, right, would not be very familiar to us. So the military is a total institution in many ways as well. And we'll see on, the next slide, kind of the fact that the military also requires, to a certain extent, a resocialization into the values, the norms, the rituals of, military life. So resocialization, necessary, for a prison, a convent, a monastery, the military, a cult, but even, maybe later in life, if any of us ever has to move into a senior care center, or if any of you were ever sent to like a boarding school, that would require some resocialization as well, where, you're kind of in a more like secluded society or environment, and you have to learn, okay, in this new world, what are the rules? The old rules don't apply anymore. Who I was before doesn't necessarily make sense in this new institution. So we have to figure out who we are and how we fit in, and in many ways have to unlearn the roles that we had before. So resocialization is a two-step process. And the first step is the degradation ceremony. And this is basically, this process by which we tear down our old identity, or it's torn down for us. So we have to leave behind kind of our old role, our old way of understanding ourselves and how we fit into that old society. And we have to start taking on this new role in this new society and figure out, what is my new identity here? There's often a lot of symbolic actions that will take place during the segregation ceremony. Things like, getting rid of all your personal belongings, cutting ties maybe with your family or your friends from before, cutting off all of your hair, losing some of your rights and freedoms, as would happen in a prison or maybe a cult. And only once we've gone through that degradation ceremony can we move to step 2, which is when we really start to understand how we fit in the new society, how we build our new identity up in line with the new norms, the new rules, beliefs, values of the institution that we find ourselves in now. And I'll leave you with this last slide. There's a video in chapter 5 on the degradation ceremony. It's a short little video that shows you kind of the first day of these recruits at Marine Corps boot camp in Parris Island, up in South Carolina. And it's pretty dramatic, the drill sergeants are yelling, they're, very aggressive with a lot of the recruits, they're, making them talking about cutting their hair, taking away their belongings, they can't, when they call their parents back home to let them know they've arrived, they have to follow like a very strict script, they can't be saying, I love you, I miss you. So this video is a really good illustration of the degradation ceremony. which has to happen in the military, and there's a female sergeant in here who, I don't remember the exact quote, but she says, the whole point of this is to tear down that feeling of I so that we can then build them up with the feeling of we. And that's really necessary in the military. You don't want people looking out for themselves, or the I and the me. You want in a military, people who think as a team, as a unit, who think of themselves as, one body, who succeeds together or fails together. So the military is a good example, of especially like in the beginning when you go to boot camp, of kind of this degradation ceremony. You have to get rid of the I so that you can build up the sense of we. All right, and that's the end of this week's chapter. Not too hard this week. So that's that for socialization. And send me an email if you have any questions, concerns about anything. You'll have the Chapter 5 quiz coming up, so make sure you pay attention to the announcements in the course schedule for that deadline. All right, I'll talk to y'all soon, and we'll get into Chapter 6, Groups and Organization, next time. Have a great week, y'all. Bye.